Very well, guys. So let's get started with the chest muscles, which are one of my favorite parts of the sculpting process because they're very easy to see, right, and easy to understand. So the brushes that we're going to be using quite frequently are the same ones we've been using so far, which is clay buildup, standard, and trim dynamic. So I'm going to start here with the pectoral muscle, which is this big muscle that we have right here on the chest. And as we've mentioned before, it starts or it originates on the sternum, on the clavicle, and it goes towards the arm. So as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm using the direction of my pen to generate like the fibers that are gonna make up the volume that I want this chest muscle to have. It's gonna be right here going towards the arm. When we take a look at the shoulder, I'll explain the connection that we normally get right here, but in this case, I just wanna add the volume right here. And then we can fill in the volume and decide how big we want this pectoral muscle to be. Now, in this case of this character, it's quite big, right? So I'm going to start adding more volume right here. And one of the things that I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump to my trim dynamic, and I'm going to start creating the nice sharp line that we talked about on the last video. So here, I'm going to start using my trim dynamic to generate the planes of the muscle going into the armpit right there. So all of this right here, like this. There we go. And we go back to clay buildup to add more volume right there. Don't worry about the wrinkles. Don't worry about the veins or all of those stuff. We're gonna add that later. Right now, we just want to focus on the volumes. Now, something really funny is going to be happening as we move forward with the different muscles on the character. And that's the fact that since we're polishing certain areas, other areas of the character are not going to look as polished. Here's where polygroups come into play because we can use them to divide the main areas that we talked about before. So I'm going to turn on polygroups real quick. I'm going to press Ctrl W to make sure everything has a single polygroup. And then I'm going to go to mask lasso. And what I'm going to do here is, for instance, I'm going to mask the head. I'm going to press Ctrl W, and that's going to mask the head. I'm going to now mask the arm. I'm going to press Ctrl W. And then I'm going to mask the forearm, Ctrl W. Mask the hand, Ctrl W. It doesn't have to be precise masks, but as clean as possible. The legs, Ctrl W. The lower legs, Ctrl W. And the feet, Ctrl W. So now, if I press Ctrl Shift and just select this part right here, I'm going to be able to focus on just the chest area without having to worry about all of the other elements. So this right here, again, is our chest. I'm going to use Damien as standard, and let's create the simplified, the stylized version of the chest right here. Usually there's a little bit of a cut right here as we go towards the center. Now, as for bones, one of the most important bones is, of course, going to be the clavicle, which we're going to see quite frequently right around here. And we're going to see the border of the clavicle going towards the shoulder right around there. So we can just quickly sketch where the clavicle is going to be. In male characters, it's very, very often that we're going to be seeing this nice group that's called the deltopectoral group. So I'm going to carve in a little bit of a triangle right in this area. Later on, when we do the deltoid, we're going to play around with those areas a little bit more. But right now, just a nice little hole in that specific part. Now down here, as we've mentioned before, we have the ribcage border. So the ribcage is going to start here from the pectoral muscles, or right underneath it, and it's going to create a very, very strong border. You can actually feel your border if you use your fingers and you start touching. You can feel all of the ribcage border going around this area. And the ribcage border is very important because this is where we're going to be inserting or generating a lot of the muscles that we have right here. So I'm going to very, very quickly create the ribcage border right there. And this is going to leave all of this empty area for the abdominal muscles, the rectus abdominis, which is this one right here. Now, a super, super important muscle that we need to add right now is this huge mass that we see right here, which is actually a muscle that's coming from the back. But we see the silhouette on the front, and it's going to really help us identify this super stylized effect. And that is called the latissimus dorsi. So it originates down here or back here on the spine, and it goes all the way around, kind of like a cape, surrounding the sides of our character. And right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the volume that I would expect to see right around here. This muscle is specifically visible in boxers and people that do a lot of fighting, because you use this muscle quite a bit to bring your arm back. So I'm going to add all of the volume right there for that specific muscle. Now, as you can see, we're already having a little bit of an issue with the separation of the torso and the rest of the character. And this particularly is happening because this character is a very bulky character. So I want to bring the arms a little bit further up. How do we do this? We press Control. I'm going to grab again my mask lasso. Let's mask all of these areas right here. Invert the mask, press W. I'm going to press Alt, open the little lock so that we can like center this pivot point and push this pivot point to the side like this. And once it's right there, we just move this like this, adjust it a little bit. Don't worry if things deform a little bit too much. We're in an early stage, so we can very easily just fix this with, for instance, our move brush to fix some of that area right there. Now I can see that this guy's, like, the chest is just ridiculous. It's super, super, super big. So let's use our clay buildup again to create the main forms right here. Let's clean up the pectoral muscle a little bit right there. Let's clean it up a little bit right there. And we're gonna make sure that we're capturing the shapes first. We do not want to capture the details. We want to capture the main shapes of the character first. From the side view, as what we have here on our little reference, you can see that the chest is creating this sort of like ramp going forward. So we're gonna see the chest going forward, and then it goes in. That's the rib border right there, and then we have the abdominal muscles later on. So here, I think I'm gonna like exaggerate this a little bit more. So I'm gonna push that a little bit more like that. Perfect. Let's go back to our concept. There we go. And now let's talk about the abdominal muscles, which are a very, very important muscle. So it's very, very common. People make a lot of mistakes with the abdominal muscles because they can be very tricky. And there's actually some anatomical like variations in like humans. So if you look for reference, you might see some people with more abdominal muscles that it might look like you should have. But it's not that they have more. It's just that sometimes the way that they are like strengthened generate the effect that we have more little like muscles right there. So usually the abdominal muscles are going to be 8 muscles. We're going to have 2 right here on top of the rib border, 2 right here, 2 more right here, then we got the navel, and then finally 2 more all the way down here. These 6 ones are the ones that we normally see, or that we see the most. This is what we normally refer to as the 6-pack, right? So they're going to be right here, but there's always going to be a little bit, and you can see them here on the concept, a little bit of volume right around there. So again, with clay buildup, I'm gonna build up that volume, again not going over or higher than the pectoral muscles, but we're gonna have a volume right around there. And then we got these ones right here, which are the secondary ones. Again, don't worry, we're gonna polish all of the shapes later on. We got the third ones right here. This is where the navel is gonna be right there, and then the 4 ones right around here. Let's isolate the chest so we can see it a little bit better. And again, we know that usually these guys are a little bit like further in. Let's push the back a little bit more right around there. And that's pretty much it. Let's carve out a lot of the area right here, because we're going to have some important muscles later on in this area. This is called the serratus anterior, all of these bones right here. Right now, I'm just going to capture the volume. So the volume is going to be like this, or like bulging out on that particular area, following the same shape of the rib cage border. Very important that we follow the same sort of shape. On the pectoral muscle, like you can see, it's looking a little bit weird here. It usually falls a little bit more, so I'm gonna round it out down here. There we go. So as you can see, we're building, slowly building all of these things right here. Right here where the pectoral muscle ends, we have something called the xiphoid process, which is like a little like thingy on the very end of the what's the word? On the very end of the, oh my god, of the sternum. The sternum is made of 3 parts, and this is like the last part. And sometimes you will see a dip, and sometimes you will see like a little bulge, depending again on the person. And you can see this is very common in like stylized character. We have like a lot of like bulges here on the rib cage, which are all of the ribs like kind of like pushing out and in. You can add them, as I'm doing right there, if you want. But I'm actually going to use my trim dynamic to start simplifying some of the shapes a little bit more. There we go. So just a quick overview. We got pectoral muscle, we got the abdominal muscles right here. We get the latissimus dorsi, and we got the serratus anterior, which is going to be right here. Again, don't worry about the detail. We'll fill this volume in later on. Right now, we're doing like the simplified version of the muscles. Then, down here, we got the obliques, which you can see right here. So the obliques are gonna sit on top of the pelvis. They're gonna generate like the little like love handles, as they usually call them as well, right here on the side of the character. This is what's gonna give us the silhouette, the sort of like a V-shaped silhouette that we're expecting to see on our character. And these love handles actually go all the way to the back. When we see the back muscles, we're also gonna be taking a look at this guys right here. Again, notice how when I'm adding muscles, I always try to follow the same like direction and flow of the fibers, so that when we smooth them out or modify them, everything just falls a little bit easier. I'm gonna use my move brush here, push this in a little bit more, push this out a little bit more, and here's where you gotta check your concept and be like, okay, am I making these things like the right size? Do I need to make them a little bit smaller? Like, how do we clean this up? And the best way to clean things up, as we've mentioned before, without losing a lot of the shapes that we have, is of course with Trim Dynamic. So I'm going to use Trim Dynamic here to start generating the planes. You can see the shadow underneath the abdominal muscles, which is what I'm doing right there. I'm creating the upper volume on this part right here, and the lower volume on this part right here. And then with the Trim Dynamic, we can clean that up and generate a very like low poly. It's not low poly, of course, but like a simplify base mesh section or generation of these things. Usually the ribcage border is going to be a big shadow right here, kind of blends itself as we go back to our position right there. And look at that. So with that done, as you can see, our chest is looking quite nice. Usually the chest is not like merged on the center. So I'm going to use my Damien standard here to create a little bit of separation. We're going to have some strong like elements later on there to blend them together. There's usually again like a little bit of a division between the pectoral muscle. And there we go. I'm going to use Damien standard again to separate the rib cage, because again there's usually like a little bit of dip that separates the ribcage. And even though it might look a little bit too extreme right now, like all of this construction that we're doing, we're going to be adding the layers of fat, skin, folds, and all that stuff, and that's going to make this thing look more natural. But in a very similar way to how we did the skull in the first chapter, we need to work on primary forms. These are a little bit more like secondary forms already, and then we're going to go to the tertiary forms. So again, with Trim Dynamic, I'm going to polish this a little bit, because when you see it from the top, the chest kind of like wraps around your character. It's not like completely flat pushing forward. So you got to see it from the top, and it should have this sort of like curvature to it. Again, it's very important that we can constantly like rotate our sculpture around to make sure that we're capturing all of those details. Yeah, I like what I'm seeing so far. I think we're in a good position. I'm going to just crunch this a little bit more towards the top side. But that does look like a nice effect. We might need a little bit more stylization later on, so proportion-wise, depending on the shoulders and all that stuff. But so far, I think we're nailing the sort of like exaggerated anatomy that we're going for right here. Might want to like stretch this to the sides just a tad bit more, so that when we see it from the side, again, here what I'm seeing is I'm looking at the distance that we have right here, making sure that we have a similar distance there. I'm looking at the distance that we have here. It's 1, 2, 3. It's 1, 2, 3. This one seems a little bit bigger, so I might need to push this down a little bit. Of course, we're missing all of the armor and all of the other stuff, but yeah, so far we're capturing most of the primary shapes here on the chest very nicely. So I'm going to stop right here, my friends, and we're now going to jump onto the back. And this, of course, is going to require me to do some changes on the neck as well, and then a little bit on the arms. But we definitely need to fix this so that we can properly match like the main mass that we have here on the character. If we can match that and capture that properly, then everything else is just going to fall into place. So yeah, hang on tight, and I'll see you back on the next video.